This, ladies and gentlemen, is football.
Hello and welcome to Total A-Leagues. This week, the show where we discuss everything that's going on in the A-Leagues right now. I'm your host, James Dodd, standing in for Vince Rigari this week. Tommy Oar, we did see Vince running around the office, trying to desperately pass the late fitness test. He didn't do it, unfortunately. Best of luck, Vince. We'll hopefully see you next week. Tommy, plenty to discuss. Ready to get into it?
Nothing but ready, mate.
Here we go. Well, there is only one place to start. The New Zealand Derby, the Kiwi Classico, call it what you want. This week promises to be an absolute belter in the Socceroo A-League. We saw it the weekend at Go Media Mount Smart Stadium. Before the game, there was a, let's call it housery, shall we, from some of the Wellington Phoenix fans. Look at this banner flying over the top of the stadium just as the players were coming out. The first thing they see is NZ is yellow, see you next week. It's 1v2, Auckland at the top, Wellington in second place. This promises to be an absolutely belting occasion at Sky Stadium.
It does, and I love to see that. I thought that the banter in that situation was amazing, and I think the whole build-up for this derby has been incredible, because if you think back over the last few seasons, the last time I can remember this kind of much anticipation in the lead up to an A-League game was maybe when Ninkovic changed for Western Sydney Wanderers and that Sydney derby. Because, yeah, I feel like this has been hot on everyone's lips the last few weeks, and, you know, the way that both teams have started the season as well, there's just, yeah, so much to look forward to in this game.
Auckland have had a red-hot start, haven't they? You know, they've got 6 points already. I said to you before, they've actually equalled the points tally that the New Zealand Knights got in the 05-06 season, so it's a great occasion for New Zealand football. They come into this as definitely not underdogs, but you know, you see quite clearly what it means to Wellington, because you see what they did with the banner over the ground beforehand. There was like a billboard outside the ground that the Auckland fans had to walk past. It was about Wellington Phoenix fans as well. How much of a statement would this be for Auckland to go there in their first away game and to go and get a result?
It would be huge, and I think that, you know, the stunt that Wellington pulled off was a little bit, I think, to change the narrative back to them, because I think everybody in the last few weeks has been talking about Auckland, and Wellington, you know, after finishing last year so strongly, has started this year very well as well, but have kind of slid under the radar. So I think that, you know, that was kind of an effort for them to kind of change the narrative back to them. But I feel like in this game, there's so many talking points on and off the field, because, you know, obviously a new club, as you mentioned, the first away game for Auckland. How many travelling fans will there be? You know, will many Wellington fans maybe from Auckland, you know, change their allegiances to be in blue this weekend? There's so many kind of interesting narratives and discussion points that will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, they got a great win over Sydney FC at the weekend. Steve Corica against his old side. Let's hear from the Black Knights boss looking ahead to the New Zealand Derby.
The fans are very passionate about the derbies, the players are, and you know, we want to put on a good performance. Obviously, away from home, our first chance to be away from home, and you know, we want to go there and win, and it's as simple as that.
Well, if you look at the approach, let's go on the pitch stuff now, Tommy. The fact that Auckland head into this game, you know, albeit it's a small sample size, but 2 games in, they have had the least possession per team in the Socceroo A-League this season. Are they going there in an attempt to hit on the counter-attack and really frustrate Wellington Phoenix?
Well, I think in derby football, the football is very different. I think the intensity of this game is going to be really high, and I don't think it'll be, you know, maybe the most beautiful football game we've seen. We saw in the Melbourne Derby last week what happens when one team doesn't turn up, and I think that the emphasis for both the coaches will be on making sure that both the teams are up for the fight. And I think what Auckland's done really well so far in their first 2 games is they haven't played with any nerves. You know, the players have gone out and felt free to express themselves, and I think that'll be really important in this game too, because there'll be a lot of Auckland players that will be under a lot of pressure, the likes of Alex Paulson. He's obviously going to get a very frosty reception in this game. You know, they've got 3 or 4 players, the likes of Scott Galloway, if he plays. You know, he did play for Wellington once before, so there's an interesting kind of few things that could unfold there in terms of, you know, players maybe being a little bit nervous in this game. So I think that for them, I don't expect them to have much of the ball, and I think they'll very much kind of continue where they've left off in the last 2 games and try and hurt the other team in transition.
If you're a Wellington Phoenix supporter, you must be annoyed by the amount of, you know, it's natural, the amount of attention that Auckland are getting, Tommy, but you must be quite frustrated because they've come off the back of their best ever season last year. Yet everybody is only talking about Auckland FC. Do you anticipate them and Giancarlo Italiano approaching this game in a bit more of a proactive manner, really trying to assert their dominance first up? Because it would no doubt have been on the dressing room, the talk of training, all last week, all this week as well, that let's give these noisy neighbours a bit of treatment here, because, you know, we're the big team in New Zealand, not them. Absolutely,
and I think that, you know, they haven't conceded a goal yet, Auckland, and we don't know how they're going to handle, you know, if a setback like that. If Wellington can put them under really early pressure, and we know how dangerous Wellington is going forward with the likes of Costa Barbarouses, if they can get an early goal, that poses a question to Auckland that they've not had to deal with yet. And I think that's exactly right. I think that'll be the emphasis for Wellington in this game. And, you know, there's so many, you know, that Derby football, the likes of Costa Barbarouses, we talked about it off air. He's played now in the Melbourne Derby, the Sydney Derby. He played for Brisbane against Gold Coast United. He knows what it means to play in a big derby in the A-League, and I'm expecting a big game from him.
Two quick questions for you.
Yeah.
Who's going to be the first player to put their foot in this game? My money's on Alex Ruva.
I think that's a safe bet. I think first yellow card. I think he'll be paying short odds for that. I think, you know, in Derby football as well, we saw it, like I said before, in last weekend. I think that, you know, players being up for the fight, that's going to go a long ways to see who wins this game.
Secondly, Alex Paulson, we touched on him just then. Obviously, he had an amazing season, goalkeeper of the year last year with Wellington Phoenix. Got his move to AFC Bournemouth in the Premier League, back on loan at Auckland FC. Goalkeepers are a little bit different in games like this because the pressure is on them, especially when Alex Paulson was amazing last year. But let's say, for argument's sake, Wellington keep ball in this for the first 5 minutes of the game. He's going to be stewing Alex Paulson just to try and get his first touch. You know, it's easier for a central midfielder, right? But for Alex Paulson, the first ball that comes back to him, if that wind is swirling around in Sky Stadium, this is not going to be a nice atmosphere for Alex Paulson.
Absolutely not. And I think this will be interesting because a lot of players relish that kind of atmosphere and that kind of reception. And I don't think he will have faced it so far in his career, you know, the frosty reception he's undoubtedly going to receive. And as a goalkeeper, you just touched on it, there's nowhere to hide. So that's definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on in this game.
Does promise to be an absolutely fantastic occasion this weekend. Make sure you watch that one if you're lucky enough to get a ticket. Good for you in Sky Stadium over in Wellington. Right, another big derby that took place in round 2 of the Isuzu A-League. Tommy Oar, Melbourne Derby. Melbourne City 1, Melbourne Victory 3. An absolutely dominant performance, especially in that first half from Melbourne Victory. Now, are there going to be a few people eating a little bit of humble pie after this result? Because Patrick Kisnorbo's appointment at Melbourne Victory, having been a Melbourne City Championship winner, a legend at the club, there would have been a few Victory fans who weren't overly happy about Patrick Kisnorbo getting this gig. Has he sort of silenced those people, do you think?
I think so, and I think that, you know, a lot of the question marks around his appointment surprised me because I can understand from a Melbourne City perspective they might have been frustrated at him changing allegiances to their neighbours, but from a Victory perspective, they've gained a fantastic asset and a proven winner in this league, and I think that, you know, their performance in this game was a real statement and has given them a real platform to grow on, you know, now going into the season. And, you know, the way they played and the intensity that they played with was really, you know, reminiscent of the Melbourne City from a few years ago when he managed there. So he's obviously managed to instill that same kind of, you know, work ethic and belief in the players, and I think it's an exciting time to be a Melbourne Victory fan.
I think with Victory in particular, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as a former player. They were good in the Australia Cup final but couldn't find the back of the net. Ultimately it goes down as a defeat in a cup final, right? Not a great start for Patrick Kisnorbo when you look at it that way. They were good against Central Coast Mariners, especially in the first half. Roderick Miranda then gets sent off, they're down to 10, it becomes a different game. This game they really put their foot on the throat of Melbourne City and didn't ease up at all. Are you expecting them to really sort of start moving through the gears now? Because you listen to Patrick Kisnorbo after the games, he was asked about Daniel Lozani as a prime example. He was really short and swift. He said, Daniel's fit doesn't mean he's going to get selected. He's up to him and up to other players to really push themselves in training and show me why they deserve to be in this team. Bruno Fornaroli, the prime example, Nikos Virgos coming in. Are you expecting them to start kicking on now, Victory?
I think so, and I think that, you know, they can take a lot of confidence from this game. I thought that, you know, obviously against the Mariners, they weren't poor, but I didn't think they played with the same intensity they played with in this game. And the intensity is the key word that Patrick Kisnorbo's teams all play with and without the ball. And I feel like if you look at a lot of the chances they created last weekend, it was also as a result of their pressing. I feel like they're at their best when they maybe don't have the ball. And that was, you know, Melbourne City is a team that likes to have possession. And I think that Melbourne Victory under Patrick Kisnorbo will be at their best this season against the teams, against maybe the likes of Sydney FC, where the other team has the ball and they can win the ball in dangerous areas for the opposition. I think that that's exactly how the last weekend played out.
Well, victory for them. City, unfortunately, their head coach, Aurelio Vidmar, was not pleased after that result, as you'd expect. This is what he had to say in his post-match press conference.
Horrendous. We weren't even close to the football for the first 20 minutes. And yeah, every duel we lost, we weren't competitive, we weren't moving quickly. And if you can't get up for a game like this, there's something definitely wrong. The contrast of the first and the second half, and that was more like us. But Christ, do we need to cop 3 goals before we actually turn up? So we have a little bit of work to do in that regard. I don't want to see that again.
He doesn't want to see that again. Hopefully for his players' sakes, they won't be seeing that again, Tommy Oar. But that's to open a press conference with the word horrendous to describe your team's performance is strong from Aurelio Vidmar. From a player's perspective, how close do you think that is to treading the line of calling them out in public?
Yeah.
Some would say throwing them under the bus. Or is that exactly the kind of rocket that the players needed after a first half showing like that?
Well, he didn't mince his words, obviously, and obviously it was a very strong statement, and I feel like he's laid down a marker going forward for a lot of his team. But I feel like it was called for, and I feel like from a player's perspective, when it's difficult when a coach comes out and makes comments is when you feel like it's uncalled for. So in this game, I feel like the reality is, you know, tactics are one thing, but they didn't compete. They weren't up. They were way too casual. There was no intensity in their play. And I feel like that's why they lost the game. So that is down to the players. So I feel like it was very, justified he was very justified in his comments. And from a player's perspective, I feel like there'll be a lot of self-reflection this week. And I'm sure that, he'll be looking for a big reaction next weekend. I'm
going to play amateur psychologist here, Tommy, because I want to get your opinion on this. As a former player, whose job is it to motivate a team when they go out? Is it a split? Is it the coach's job to really get them fired up? Or should that be on the senior players in that team to lay down a marker in the tunnel and say, hey, listen, we go out there, we win the first ball. This is our home. This is a big game for us. We don't get bullied off the pitch like they were in that first 20, 25 minutes. Yeah, well, I feel like in great teams, the culture and the motivation is driven from the players. And, the coach obviously has a huge role in creating the culture for the team. But ultimately, in winning teams, from my experience, it was always driven at training and on game day by the players. And the coach would obviously guide the tactics and these types of things. But that, hunger and that fight, that it needs to come from within. And I feel like that was maybe the disappointing thing from a Melbourne City perspective, and why their fans were so disappointed on the weekend was because the players really were quite lackluster, and they weren't up for what is for them one of the biggest games of the year. And I think in Vidmar's comments, he was obviously he highlighted how if you're not going to get up for this game, then when will you be up for a game of football? And I think that's exactly right. And I feel like There are some question marks around some of his tactical choices in this game. Obviously, he changed from, a back 4 to a back 5, which a lot of people question marked, and also having the likes of Atkinson in midfield was called for a lot of criticism. But ultimately, like I said before, the reason they lost the game was because of their mindset going into the game, and nothing to do with tactics. So on that, if you look at the tactics from Aurelio Vidmar, if he's calling out players after the game and their I suppose their mentality more so than their qualities as footballers, how does that play in the dressing room? Because I'm sure you've been in a situation where a manager's maybe not individually given you a rollicking, or if he has, I want to know if he's given you a rollicking. Because how did that make you feel? And do you feel as though that's almost a deflection tactic if it is that? Yeah, well, it can be, and but in this situation, I don't feel like that's what happened. But I feel like when you feel as a player like you've been set onto the pitch to fail and the tactics aren't there, and then the coach comes out and makes comments like this, that's when I think you can lose a dressing room as a manager. But I feel like as we just touched on, I feel like in this game, that's not what happened. So I feel like, the players will probably, take his message on board and feel quite strongly about it and feel the need to give a reaction. So I feel like Vidmar was very warranted in his comments, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of reaction we get this weekend. Let's touch on one of the individuals, shall we? Melbourne City, Marco Tilio. Was a great coup for the club, getting him back on loan for the season from Celtic. He scored the winner in their opening game against Newcastle Jets. Marco Tilio, Tommy, cut a frustrated figure in this game. Why? He did, and we saw glimpses, obviously, the left foot shot in the first half, which was a great save that we just saw. He showed glimpses of what he's capable of, but Marco Tilio, I'm a huge fan of his, and every time he plays with such a spark, and he lights up the game, to be honest. And I thought in this game, he just wasn't given the ball in the situations to influence the game as many times as he would have liked. And I feel like that was
one of the reasons that Melbourne City couldn't, enforce themselves on this game was they couldn't get their best players the ball in dangerous positions. And I feel like an interesting thought that I had was, well, if Tilio was wearing a Melbourne Victory jersey playing against the Melbourne City back three, would he have done, in a similar way to Piscopo and these types of players did in this game? And I feel like he would have. And I feel like that's probably why he was so frustrated, was he wasn't getting the service.
Well, Marco Tilio, we know his qualities, Tommy. I mean, since he's returned from Celtic at the back end of last season for that half a season he spent on loan ahead of this campaign, he was outstanding. I mean, you only got to see what he did against Sydney FC at Allianz Stadium, scored, for me, one of the best goals of the season. So we know his qualities. But the question I've got for you here is Marco Tilio and maybe Andrew Naboo and to a lesser extent Jonathan Cohen, because he's a new player in the team, even though he started very well, are they struggling because they don't have Jamie McLaren in there?
Well, maybe Jamie McLaren as one piece, but they also have like Max Caputo and Matt Leckie also injured. And I feel like, right now, if I'm looking at Melbourne City going forward, I see Tilio as their main threat. And from a defensive, from an opposition's team perspective, if you're trying to nullify an opposition and there's one main player, it's easier to nullify. I feel like, the Melbourne City we're seeing going forward now isn't necessarily the Melbourne City we're going to see for the majority of the season once they have their players back from injury. And I feel like when the likes of Matt Leckie come back into the lineup, that'll really take a lot of the pressure off Tilio, and I feel like that's when we might see him at his best. It
will be interesting to see how Melbourne City and Melbourne Victory move on in the next round of the Isuzu A-League. Melbourne City away on Monday evening against Western United. Melbourne Victory home to Macarthur FC. Talking of a Melbourne Victory player, or a former one at that, Eli Adams, Tommy Oar. What a performance from this young man against Macarthur. Newcastle Jets going there on in the first game of the latest round of Isuzu A-League action. Everyone thought Macarthur were going to win this game. 2-1, it finished to the Jets. Eli Adams, the absolute sensation in the second half. What did you make of his performance in general? And is there a chance that Eli Adams could now be on the radar of Tony Popovich?
I feel like it's too early for the Socceroos call. In terms of breaking through, he showed his talent. And I feel like the thing that was so impressive in this game was he obviously scored that first goal, and it was such a good goal. That touch around Matt German to set up the goal, and obviously a fantastic finish. But to score a second goal so shortly after shows incredible maturity, because I know when I scored my first A-League goal, I was on cloud nine for about a week, and he just shook that off after a few minutes and managed to compose himself to score another great goal. And I feel like the maturity that he showed to do that was really impressive. And now, he's obviously got massive shoes to fill this year. And Newcastle Jets, I feel like goal scoring was a big question mark going into this season. Where are the goals going to come from? And I'm sure they'll be very relieved and very hopeful going forward that he can keep producing games like he just did.
Well, Apostolos Stamatolopoulos leaving the club. He hit 17 goals last year in the Isuzu A-League in a Newcastle team that, let's be honest, did struggle at times last year given their reliance upon youth. Talking about moves and young players in particular, knowing when to make the next step and where to go. You did that in your career. What was the key factor in that? Because I dare say an agent will be in your ear saying, this is a good move, this is a good move, this is more money, this is more money. But as a player, what do you think Eli Adams was looking at when he made this move to Newcastle Jets, and how do you lean into that from your own experience?
Well, I think the most important thing for any footballer, regardless of which league or which transfer you're making, is you need to at least have an opportunity to play match minutes in men's football. Not, we've seen a lot of A-League players go overseas and go to the academies or the youth teams of big clubs. And for me, I feel like that's wrong, because the fastest way to learn for me is to play. Regardless of what coaching you get, you need the experience and the match day experience and maturity. You need to mature as a player. And I feel like that move to the Newcastle Jets for him was a really smart one, because, we've seen over the last few years how willing they are to give young players a chance who have maybe struggled for game times at the Melbourne or the Sydney clubs or these types of things. And I feel like he's, obviously started really well, and hopefully this is going to be the beginning of him really kicking on this year. So for me, I feel like, making sure you have the opportunity to play and that the club is invested in your development. Maybe, that can look at a number of different ways. It can be, if the club gives you a long-term contract, that's often a good indication of they're willing to be patient with you and they have a lot of belief in you. But I feel like, a lot of players are maybe impatient and they're not willing to fight for their place, and they move on too quickly as well. So there's not one thing that, players need to look out for when making these moves, but I feel like for him, Newcastle looks like a great place for him.
So why then FC Utrecht for you?
Yeah, so when I went overseas from Brisbane, I had the choice of going to FC Utrecht or Feyenoord. And, the Pim Verbeek was the Socceroos coach at the time, and he pushed me to go to FC Utrecht, which you know, we probably had more likelihood of getting some match minutes. But I remember when I turned up, the left winger at the club at the time was Dries Mertens, and it didn't really pan out the way I thought for the first season. But ultimately, like I touched on before, they gave me a 5-year contract, and I was able, you know, they showed a lot of faith in me and really put a lot of, you know, I had 5 years to kind of prove myself, and it took me maybe two and a half years to kind of break into the first team on a regular basis. And from there, you know, I feel like I matured a lot as a player, and I feel like that was the key to me, you know, breaking in and having a successful time there, was the fact that they were willing to be patient with me.
Do you blame Pim Verbeek for that?
Yeah. Well, I probably should have done a bit more research in terms of who the left wingers were on the books. But no, the year before I signed, Dries Mertens had his first year at Utrecht, and he obviously was a really good player, but he didn't have the breakout year that, you know, and go on. Nobody expected him to go on to become the player that he ended up becoming. But at the same time, I was fortunate to play with some great teammates and learn a lot from them as well. Hey,
I know who's got a major piece of silverware in the trophy cabinet at home in terms of an international level. It's not Dries Mertens. Let's talk about the Socceroos then, because we touched on it at the start of the show. Just start the section, I should say, Tommy. If Eli Adams is too soon for him in terms of a call-up under Tony Popovich, what about two players who were on the opposition team that night? Marin Jakalic, we'll come on to him in just a second, because people at home will be thinking that's a rogue call. He is eligible. What about Jed Drew? Because he's had a great start to the season. He's a young, exciting, attacking winner. He's got an increased output this year from what we've seen him at MacArthur in the last season. Too soon still, or are you thinking he's probably ahead of Eli Adams in that pecking order?
I think Jed Drew would be ahead of Eli Adams in the pecking order, just purely from an experience perspective. But at the same time, I do think it's probably too premature for him as well. I think that, you know, he's such a good talent, but if you look at, you know, the likes of Jakalic and Jed Drew, I don't think they've done enough on a consistent basis to get into the Socceroos, because, you know, Jakalic last year at Melbourne City, he scored 2 goals. And for an attacking player, I feel like you need a better output than that if you're going to get into the national team. But at the same time, obviously he's been very good so far in the first 2 games. But I feel like there's a lot of A-League players who also have missed out on recent Socceroos camps that, you know, could consider themselves maybe a little bit unlucky, or maybe have a better claim to be in the Socceroos. And I feel like one player at MacArthur who I think will be a Socceroo one day soon is Jake Holman, because the thing that I feel like national team managers in particular, where they have a very limited amount of time to work with players, really value is players with football intelligence. And that's something that he's got in abundance. And I feel like, you know, you can trust him tactically and technically to implement any game plan. And I feel like with Jed Drew, he might be just a little bit too raw still, but at the same time, you know, if he keeps on the trajectory he's going on, then in the future, for sure, that could be a possibility.
Right, A-Leagues fans, football fans around the world will know that injury time, stoppage time, time added on is a key, valuable part of any football match. We're doing that here, extra time, 3 minutes to get through a select number of topics. Tommy Oar, I'm going to start you with a fantastic initiative the Newcastle Jets have put in place this year, the Jets Past Players Suites. They have adopted this great initiative. Basically, if you're a men's player, women's player, you've played for Newcastle Jets at any point, you can go and watch games this season. How good is that?
Sensational. I feel like this has been maybe taking too long to happen. I feel like, you know, when players retire or leave a club, I feel like they're quickly forgotten, and I don't think that should be the case. If we look at, you know, the Premier League and these types of leagues, you always see the football players in the crowd, and they're still very much in and around the clubs and amongst it, and it's a fantastic initiative. And, you know, I was just thinking, you know, if you're a Brisbane Roar fan and you rocked up to a game and Thomas Broich was in the crowd one day, how much of a kick that would give you and how great that would be for the kids at the game. And I feel like we need to see more of that. So it's a fantastic initiative from them, and hopefully we can see more of it.
You never know. You could be turning up and you could be sitting in the Tommy Oar suite at Suncorp Stadium. Moving on, Ninja A-League is back this week. A fantastic initiative again this year. If you are 16 years of age or under, you can sign up for a Ninja Pass and you get access to the first 4 rounds of the season. That is such a good initiative to get young boys, girls into football to go and watch the Ninja A-League and the stars that are in the league this year as well. It's
amazing. And, you know, I feel like, you know, not only the football perspective, but the carnival atmosphere it will create and the hype. And no, I can't wait for it to start. And yeah, I feel like it's so exciting to do this. And I'm a really big fan of this initiative, you know, to have all the games in one city as well. So no, for me, I can't wait for this to get started. And yeah, the more football that's on, the better for everyone.
Right, no time wasting because we're running out of time and extra time here. Ronaldinho's 11 against Tim Cahill's 11. People are going, what is that? The Joga Bonito Tour is coming to Combank Stadium. Ronaldinho, if he was to have played for any Isuzu A-League team, who and why? I
said this off air, but I feel like Ronaldinho up front with Romario in the 2008 season for Adelaide would have been sensational. And Nick Stoll pointed out off air that was Ronaldinho in his prime as well. So I feel like that would have been the sweet spot for an A-League perspective to have a bit of Brazilian flair up front for Adelaide. 22nd to the 24th of November is Unite Round this season, straight off the international break. Brilliant for fans of football, both men's and women's. All the men's games are going to be at Allianz, all the women's games are going to be at Leichhardt Oval. Newcastle Jets against Central Coast Mariners, Sydney against the Wanderers in the Derby. Tommy Oar, how good is Unite Round going to be? How excited are you for it? No, I'm excited. Obviously, last year it came about very quickly, and I feel like, you know, some fans might have struggled to arrange to come in time, but this year it's been on everyone's calendars, and I feel like it's going to be fantastic. And there's some huge fixtures in that list as well, and you know, to have it all at one stadium and all the hype and you know, Moore Park with all the pubs around and the carnival atmosphere, and there'll be so much going on for the kids as well. I feel like it's a great initiative from the A-Leagues, and no, I feel like this will be a round that we look back on with fond memories. So really looking forward to watching that one. Looking forward to it, Tommy. Thanks for your company this week. Vince, hopefully you're better next week, my friend. Total A-Leagues this week. We'll be back next week as per usual, discussing all the biggest talking points from the Isuzu A-League and the A-Leagues in general. Thanks for your company, Vince. We'll find out if you were sick or you were dropped. See you next week.